Hello everyone and welcome to Queens County Heritage. This is the view out the front window of the Tilley house in the beautiful village of Gagetown, New Brunswick. It is the first day of summer and it is a beauty of a day. The sun is shining and the peonies are in bloom. Did you know that Mrs. Tilley had peonies in her garden that wouldn't grow anywhere else in the village? But we're not talking about her today. As you know, the Tilley house is the birthplace of Father of Confederation, Samuel Leonard Tilley, and here is the man himself in a portrait from the 1840s. But we're not talking about him today either. We're doing the opposite. We are talking about his wife, Lady Alice Tilley. My name is Bruce Thompson, and today we are not telling his story, we're telling her story. This is the latest in our series of videos that take a look behind the scenes and in some detail of some parts of the collection that you might not see on a regular visit to one of our sites. Due to COVID-19, the Tilley House, the Loomcrofters, the Flower House are closed to the public in the summer of 2020. So this is our way of bringing the stories of Queens County heritage to you. So today we are focusing on Lady Alice Tilley. Now, Alice Starr Chipman was born the 10th of December, 1844, and she was the daughter of Zachariah Chipman and Mary DeWolf. They were both of Nova Scotia, but ended up in St. Stephen, New Brunswick. Alice's father was a prominent businessman, and he was also friendly with another prominent businessman in southern New Brunswick, a man by the name of Samuel Leonard Tilley of St. John. So when Alice grew up, in the fall of 1867, she married Samuel Leonard Tilley on the 20th of October, 1867. And the earliest image that we have of Alice Starr Chipman Tilley is this portrait that hangs in the parlor of the Tilley house. And it's under glass, so I'll try to focus it properly so we don't get too much of a reflection for you to see. This was painted within a few months up to a year after the Tilleys got married. It was painted in Montreal, and likely there was a companion painting of Leonard Tilley as well, but that has not come down to us and perhaps is lost to history. So here we have a young Alice Tilley in a beautiful brown velvet gown in the style of the 1860s. She's looking at a illustrated periodical on a very elaborate desk. The interesting thing about this painting is it is actually an overpainted photograph. The artist is down here in the corner, and let's see if we can get a focus on the artist's name. But it's by Notman and Fraser. Notman were the famous Montreal photography studio. And Notman was the photographer, Fraser was the artist. And this is signed and dated 1868. So how this would work is that Notman would take the photograph. Fraser was a talented artist, and he would work basically as a paint by number, overpainting the photograph that was done. So photography, even though it was capturing moments in time, it was also a very valuable tool for the artists of the day and provided them a bit of a guide in the work that they were doing. We do have another image of Alice Tilley. This is a little bit later in life, probably from the late 1880s, in the style of dress of the day. Now this is in black and white, but we have speculated that the color of the dress may have been a beautiful deep purple, maybe even very similar to the fabric that's on the chair that this photograph is sitting on. Now, Alice Chipman Tilley was not content to be the typical politician's wife of the 19th century. She was a generation younger than her husband, so she brought some youthful vigor to the marriage. She was also coming of age at the time of the Crimean War, the aftermath of the American Civil War, and the female stars of Florence Nightingale and Clara Barton of the Red Cross. So Alice had quite an interest in the role of women in society, the role of women's professions, and figuring out ways to support women in those particular roles. Now, she would have fulfilled her usual and expected duties of a 19th century wife of a prominent politician. She would have had the teas and the parties and the dinners and provided moral support for her husband while he was off doing his political thing. But also imagine she has two children, two more sons, Leonard Tilley Jr. and Herbert Tilley. And she was raising these two boys while her husband was lieutenant governor of the province. Can you imagine this young family living in Government House in Fredericton? There are some wonderful images around of the family out for sleigh rides, and you see the very stately Samuel Leonard Tilley and the lovely Alice Tilley, and then you see these two little heads appearing as well, which are their sons. Now, they had enough wealth that they would have had help with raising the children, but it's fun to think of these two very young boys, like toddlers, running through the halls of Government House in Fredericton. One of the most spectacular pieces that we have in our collection, of course, and visitors to the Tilley House are very familiar with, might not have seen it quite in this detail before, but is this dress that was worn by Alice Tilley. In 1879, her husband had been knighted by Queen Victoria as a reward for his support for Confederation and his service to not only New Brunswick, but of Canada as well. And that conferred the title of Lady on his wife. So henceforth, after 1879, Mrs. Tilley became known as Lady Alice Tilley. This dress is not an everyday dress, as you might imagine. She didn't dress like this every day. This is a fancy party dress. And as I pan around and show parts of it, it's so large it barely fits into the screen that I have here. But give you a sense of the grandeur of this dress and how spectacular it would have looked when she was wearing it. The story is that she wore this dress when the Tilleys were presented to Queen Victoria at a garden party on the Isle of Wight in England. So if you can imagine wearing this dress, she would have had her parasol to shade her from the sun, possibly a day very much like today with the bright sunshine, and moving through the grounds of Osborne House and the gardens would have made quite a pretty picture. We do know the maker of this dress. It was made by a company called Russell and Allen on Bond Street in London. The dressmaker's label is on the inside. And Russell and Allen were basically royal court dressmakers or couturiers. They were the go-to people if you were going to be presented at court. So they would know the style and the cut and the appropriate things to wear. Whether this was made in advance of the trip or whether it was made after the Tilleys arrived in England, we're not quite sure. We're not exactly sure of the date as well. The style is from the early 1880s. At this time, Samuel Leonard Tilley was the finance minister for Canada. He was traveling back and forth between Ottawa and London on various financial meetings and reasons. And Lady Alice must have accompanied him on one of those trips. And they scored the invitation to the garden party. The dress itself is made in two parts. The bodice is separate from the skirt. The skirt itself sits quite high on the waist, right about here. And then the bodice, which is separate, comes down over the skirt, providing a little bit of movement. She would have had pieces of underclothing as well. But here in the back, you can see where it laced up. But inside, there's also boning. So the bodice itself served as a corset to give the proper silhouette. You see the folds of fabric here at the back. This is the traditional bustle of the time period, the early 1880s. To support the weight of all of this fabric at the back, and it does weigh quite a bit. And pardon me, Lady Alice, for touching your bottom, but she has a pillow tied around her backside, right about here, to try and support the weight of all the fabric that's here at the back. And again, if you look at the details of the dress, this is the train that would, of course, trailed across the lawns of the Isle of Wight, the various layers of fabric that are here. And this is to showcase status, some wealth, some privilege. After all, she is the wife of a prominent politician. She's representing Canada. So they would want to look their very best. The skirt is probably the most expensive part of the dress, with these roses that are just stunning. The flowers are woven into the fabric. They're not appliqued, they are not painted, as some people have suggested. They're woven right into this silk brocade material. Very, very expensive technique. Probably made in France and then made into the outfit by the London dressmakers. Lady Alice did have a little accident, perhaps, at the party. You can see a little mark here. It doesn't show up. You think it's a leaf in the pattern, but that's actually a bit of a stain where she might have dropped a spot of tea during the garden party, and may have been cleaned at the time, but over time those stains tend to appear. Now, we often get the question when it comes to women's history, why are you always showing just the fancy dresses? Well, one of the reasons for that is women's history is sometimes lost to us. The letters and diaries that may have been written sometimes don't exist. Their elements of their work weren't recognized the way they should have been in terms of the work that was being done. Sometimes the only things that we have to tell these stories are the textiles, like the samplers that we've shown, some quilts that we will be showing, and fancy dresses like this that are reminders of the roles of these women in the 19th and early 20th centuries, but it's an opportunity to tell their stories. As I say, she was not content to be the typical politician's wife of the 19th century. Lady Alice was interested in nursing. She was interested in children. Hospitals were built under her patronage and leadership. In those days, there were committees that were put together, and she would lead these committees. Homes for nurses connected to the hospitals, again, building on the experience that she learned about as a young woman and in her early married life. So she was very interested in those types of things. During World War I, she was very active in the Red Cross and supporting the troops, but particularly the women nurses who were headed overseas to support the troops. Now, while her husband was lieutenant governor for a second term in the 1880s and early 1890s, the song "My Own Canadian Home" was written, and you can see here, respectfully dedicated to Lady Tilley. My Own Canadian Home, music by T. Morley, words by E.G. Nelson. And the social custom of the day was that Lady Alice would not write the thank you letter to Mr. Nelson, but it was her husband who wrote it. So here we have the actual thank you letter written by Sir Leonard Tilley from Government House. And during the second term, the Tilleys built a beautiful house in St. John on Germain Street called Carlton House, which is still standing today. But that's where they lived during the second term, and Government House in Fredericton was closed. So you can see on this note where Fredericton is crossed out and he's handwritten in Government House St. John on November the 30th, 1889. And the thank you letter starts off, "My dear Mr. Nelson, many thanks for the copy of the song and chorus kindly sent me for Lady Tilley's acceptance. She wishes me to thank you very much." And then he goes on to talk about the loyal sentiments and distinctive words of the song, and how very proud and keen both he and Lady Tilley are that the song was dedicated to her. Samuel Leonard Tilley died the 25th of June, 1896, and is buried in Fernhill Cemetery in St. John. But as I said, Lady Alice was 25 years younger, so she outlived him by 25 years. After her husband's death, author James Hannay wrote a biography of Samuel Leonard Tilley, and we'll just open it up. And the author dedicated the work to Lady Tilley, who for almost 30 years was the faithful wife, wise counselor, and constant friend of Sir Leonard Tilley. This book is respectfully dedicated by the author. So her role in her husband's political career was clearly recognized by all who knew her. She passed away at the age of 76 on the 25th of May, 1921, and she's buried with her husband in Fernhill Cemetery in St. John. It's a large monument that you can visit at any time. She had two granddaughters, Margaret Tilley Mears and Alice Tilley McKean, who attended the opening of the Tilley House as the Queens County Museum in June of 1967. And it's through Mrs. Mears and Mrs. McKean that we have many of the objects that belong to the Tilley family in our collection, including the portrait and this magnificent dress. So we thank Mrs. Mears and Mrs. McKean for their generosity, and also being able to tell the story of this very, very interesting woman and person that has a connection to Queens County. So we hope you enjoyed this little talk, little visit with Lady Alice Tilley. Please like and share our videos. If you have any comments, put them in the comment section of the post, and we will get back to you as soon as we can with an answer. Stay tuned for more Plugged Into Heritage, and as we cover more stories of women of Queens County over the next few weeks. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.